Okay, welcome everybody. I'm just going to wait a few more minutes for us to hit noon and wait for all of our panelists and some more of our participants to join. All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started with our Role Model Monday webinar today. Our focus is on STEM and energy and environmental sustainability. Um, We have here our lineup for our Zooms throughout June and July. We hope you can continue to join us for our weekly panel discussions with current students, alumni, and STEM role models from our community. Quick introduction from me. I'm Victoria Fegley. I'll be your host for today. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a WiSTEM crew member this summer at UT Austin, and I am a math major. Today we have Hannah helping us with the Q&A and chat support. If Hannah, you can give a quick intro.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah. I am a rising senior at UT Austin. I'm double majoring in American Studies and plan to honors. In my free time, I love reading, traveling, and I'm so excited for today's webinar.
Awesome. So as I said, Hannah's helping with Q&A and chat support. So if you guys have any questions for our panelists throughout the Zoom, please feel free to enter that in the Q&A portion. Just a quick reminder, that is not the chat button, that is a specific Q&A button. The next step, we will be adding all of our Role Model Monday webinars to our WeSTEM YouTube channel. So if there's any that you're not able to join, or if there's anything we talked about that you want to go back and revisit, you can feel free to find those on our YouTube channel. We also have many other videos to help future and current students. Please go ahead and subscribe to this channel to get notified when new videos are added. I'm going to throw the link in the chat for our channel so that you guys can go ahead and check that out. So now here we can, yeah, perfect. Today our focus, as I said, is on STEM and energy and environmental sustainability. We'll quickly go through and have all of our panelists share some quick introductions to get us started. Again, after these introductions, we're going to have first a facilitated Q&A panel with questions we have already pre-selected. And then after that, we are going to hear questions from our audience. So attendees, please feel free to share any questions you have in our Q&A section. For our introductions, we'll have everyone share name, pronouns if you're comfortable, your hometown, your major, degree, or field that you work in, as well as what the company is you work in. And let's also share something we do like outside of work. We can start with Tiffany first.
Sure. Hi, my name's Tiffany Wu. My pronouns are she, her. My hometown's Arlington, Texas, and I currently live in Austin. My major was chemical engineering for a bachelor's degree from 2004 to 2008. And then I also returned back to UT for a master's degree in energy and earth resources and public affairs from 2013 to 2016. And I'm currently working for McAdams Energy Group as an electricity policy consultant for a number of organizations from oil and gas to renewable companies. And I've been with the group since January, but I've been working in the space for a few years now. For in my free time, I'm currently working towards becoming a master naturalist, and I volunteer my time with conservation efforts around Austin. I love learning about nature and gardening and how our decisions feed into the bigger system. And then I also like to spend time just doing unstructured free time where I just leave my schedule open to hang out with friends and do whatever last minute. So, yeah, that's about me.
Thank you, Tiffany. Next, we'll move on to Eliza, if you could give us an intro.
Sure. My name is Elisa Kepner. I grew up outside of Houston, down near Lake Jackson, Texas, which somebody on here might actually know. It's close to Dow Chemical. I went to Texas A&M for my undergrad for industrial engineering, and I did my graduate work in systems engineering at the University of Virginia. I lived outside of Washington, D.C. for almost 30 years and worked in the government for the government, around the government, about half of that time. I do not have anywhere near the breadth and depth and the knowledge that Tiffany does. So specific things related to energy, which is very interesting and very important in this, especially around Texas, is something she will definitely have more experience in. The only real experience that I'd had around environmental sustainability was having to do environmental research for any sort of large scale implementations for like on the border when we were messing up wetlands, for example, we'd have to do studies and be able to see what we were affecting. So mine is more kind of a secondary connection to that world. I do have a passion for it though. The only things I've really gotten in trouble for were back in Virginia, there was some stuff that they were putting on the roads that was destroying the waters, and I was just up in arms. So if you look me up, you'll see a really great picture of me next to a thing like yelling at somebody. So I've been known to get in trouble related to this subject. I would love to say I live in Austin now. I moved back to Texas a couple of years ago, which is how I got involved in this because I like working with women that are going into or girls that are going into STEM of any sort. I'm a big proponent of that. And I really hope that everybody that's on this call, men or women, really go down this field. It's something that I feel like we don't have enough people going into, and we haven't for a while. The things that I do for fun, I like to be out on the water. I like to be we have a boat. I've had a boat for a long time. I have two kids. They're 16 and 18 years old. So, and they're boys, but I'll forgive them for that. So anyway, that's that's all about me.
Thank you, Elisa. Next, we'll hear from Rebecca.
Hi everyone. My name is Rebecca. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I grew up in a small town close to the Illinois-Wisconsin border called Gurnee. Um, and I went to UT for mechanical engineering undergrad and graduated in 2022. Currently, I work for a energy substation manufacturer out in near Portland, Oregon. And stuff I do for fun. I enjoy rock climbing a lot. Austin and Oregon or Portland are pretty similar. Portland's a little bit more like granola-y, as I've been told. So hiking, rock climbing, outdoorsy activities are kind of my jam.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. And last, we'll hear from Kara.
Hi, I'm Kara Kockelman. I grew up in Northern California and I studied civil engineering at UC Berkeley. So that was just an hour away from my house. If I'd grown up in Texas, I would definitely have come here to UT for that degree. And then I was in the Peace Corps for a couple of years and went back to graduate school again in civil engineering for transportation, as well as a master's in city planning and minors in economics and statistics. And I've been at UT as a professor of transportation engineering in the Department of Civil Engineering for 27 years now. A lot of my research is in the transportation, energy, and emissions area, as well as land use, because they're tightly coupled. And I also have that city planning degree. I've been swimming ever since I was quite young, so I continue doing that. I can't run as much or play soccer so much anymore. It's tough on the body at my age, so I do and really enjoy my yoga class every Saturday, and I do exercise every day, but that's kind of a highlight for me in addition to the swimming. And I walk my dog a fair bit because he likes to get out there, see what's happening, police the neighborhood for us. And of course, I enjoy seeing my friends in all sorts of ways.
All right, thank you so much, Kara. And so next we will move on to some questions for our facilitated discussion. So we'll do 2 questions. We'll have all of our panelists answer these. And then after that, we'll move on to questions from our audience. So our first question is, tell us a little bit about your career journey. Have you ended up where you always thought you would be, or were there maybe some unexpected turns that opened up new opportunities for you to land you where you are now? So how about this time? Let's start with Kara.
Okay, so I really had no idea where I'd end up. I was just good in school, extra good, I guess, at math and some of the science. And I wanted to just make the world a better place. So that was my motivation from a young age. I was interested. Actually, I wrote when I was in like third grade, I got an award for a poem named There's Got to Be a Solution to Pollution. And I must admit, my dad gave me then that name, I think. And so it was easy for me to write a poem around it. And I, when I was an undergraduate in civil engineering, because civil engineering is the most, I'd say, public oriented and sort of public protection and also environmentally protective of the majors. I had older brothers who were doing electrical and mechanical, and most of those people ended up having to go into private sector jobs where the motivation was maximizing profit. And I really did not want to have that as a motivation for whoever I worked with or for. And so a lot more of the civil engineers will go into public sector, even if they're consultants for public agencies. So there, the motivation is to maximize like net social welfare. And so I knew that civil engineering was a good choice. I minored in econ as an undergrad, and that ended up being quite helpful as well. But I still had no idea what kind of job I would get. And a lot of times when you go to civil engineering, there's a lot of structural engineering classes and maybe materials engineering classes. That was true for me. And there was only one transportation class, and it wasn't that interesting. Like we had to learn how to design a cloverleaf freeway interchange. And so it really wasn't something that resonated with me. But when I was walking through the hallways one day as a junior, I saw the number 7000 on the wall with a dollar sign in front of it. And that was a lot of money. It still is, I think. So I stopped and read what the sign was about. And it was for a fellowship if you studied transportation engineering, kind of your senior year. And unfortunately, there were no classes actually for me to take at Berkeley. It was really sad. They only had one undergraduate class. But they still chose me to do that focus. And just having to think about transportation and its role in society and like all the crashes that take place, and of course the emissions and the congestion and the city planning and quality of life impacts made it really resonate with me. And so I immediately went into the Peace Corps, because most people do that when they're about 22. So once you get your degree, you can do the Peace Corps for 2 years. But while I was in the Peace Corps, helping with potable water systems for low density, rural, poor communities in Ecuador, I was thinking about transportation back in the US. So I was able to take a step back from the academic environment and really focus. And so I came back into a transportation program again at UC Berkeley because my boyfriend was there still. I had ditched him for 2 years, and I came back, and I got the 2 master's degrees, and then I decided to get the PhD. So I wanted to see how well I performed in the graduate program before I would get a PhD, because I wanted to be able to teach at a really excellent place and have some choices in my career. So luckily I did well, and I was so lucky that UT was hiring the year that I graduated. I was so fortunate, and so I came straight here, and I've been doing amazing work thanks to all my graduate students, and several undergrads over the years have helped us do incredible work on vehicle impacts and transportation decision making and policy and that kind of thing. So that's what has shaped my path. But I do work in a lot of different domains within transportation, because I don't like to be pigeonholed or narrow. I like to really learn a lot while I work. So I end up writing papers in many different domains of transportation, which I love.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll move on to Rebecca. What has your career journey looked like?
Yeah, so mine is going to be a little bit shorter. But actually, I started off learning about more of the energy environmental sector through my first internship with the Texas Department of Transportation. So I kind of understand cars feel a little bit. And I would say if you're looking for internships, I would like government or government facilities are just a really great way to learn more about how the small decisions that you make have a huge impact in the lives of everyday citizens. And I was really grateful that that was my first internship, because that kind of helped me determine, did I want to stay in the government field? Did I want to, because in transportation, like Farah said, it's a lot of civil engineering. So I didn't really want to go into the civil engineering path. It just wasn't for me. But I was really interested in product development and manufacturing instead, and product design. My certification actually from UT was in design strategies, which was also really fun and awesome. So I did a few more internships in a couple different industries, mostly in the private sector. And then my first job out of undergrad was for a footwear company. And I really liked them because they were focused a lot on sustainability. And that's the group that I ended up working in. Well, product development with a sustainable focus. And that was really awesome. But I wanted to work for a smaller firm. So I pivoted, and luckily there was a company out here who was hiring for manufacturing in electrical substation manufacturing, and it was a very much like mechanical design manufacturing focus. So I kind of just ended up here, and it's great. My boss keeps on saying like he's so optimistic about how the industry is just going to keep on growing because of like the AI revolution, and data centers keep on popping up everywhere, and that requires so much energy to function. So a little bit about my career journey.
That's great to hear about your growing industry, and I love that we've got a little bit of overlap in the transportation between you two. That's so funny. All right, next we'll hear from Eliza.
Hey, so that's fascinating. Actually, both of the pathways you guys, everybody's pathway is a little different. I was really good at math and wasn't really good at much else. So when I got into college, I wasn't sure. I started mechanical engineering. It is a very difficult career field. Congratulations on finishing. Industrial engineering is one of the paths that people leave mechanical from when it's really hard. And if you do start down a path and it doesn't work for you, that's okay, right? You can pivot and do something else. Love civil engineering. Absolutely think it's wonderful. And I think I do think it is a very large career field for environmental and sustainability. And the people that I know, that some of my friends have children that are going into that field specifically for that. So it's not just about overpasses or bridges. It's about keeping the world we have. So I went to A&M and I did a co-op, which I wasn't sure what part of industrial engineering I wanted to do, but I was always really bossy about what was the right answer. At least that's what my grandfather told me. So he said, you should be an industrial engineer because they tell people how to do things better. And that's been my entire career, is it doesn't really matter if it's, you know, healthcare or if it's manufacturing or if it's banking or whatever it is. I tend to have an opinion about how to make it more efficient. As I've gotten older, I have learned that maybe not messing with everything is a good thing. So you do sort of learn to dampen what you're opinionated about sometimes when you go into something like industrial engineering. But I did A&M. I got out and immediately started doing discrete event modeling, simulation, system dynamic models, agent-based models as a consultant, and worked in a number of different fields and loved architecture, always had. So an architect was hiring a very large architect at the time and out of Minneapolis, and I didn't realize that flat land with snow did not mean snow skiing. So I moved to Minneapolis and froze to death, but that was okay. Wonderful, had a great time. And it's one of these things. As you go through your career, you're going to have things that pop up. Can I try this? Can I do that? Is there an opportunity? I was working out in Washington, D.C., and I saw cherry blossoms, and I thought, great place. So I just jumped over and moved out to D.C. and met my husband about a month after I got there, which, if anybody knows DC, is almost impossible. And he was working for the government. And after a couple of years, I shifted over and started working for a company called MITRE, which was a spinoff of MIT Research and Engineering. It's a federally funded research and development center. So it's one of these groups that were brought in by the government that were specialists in certain areas. And I was in systems engineering, and it was a nonprofit. It still is around. So I worked there for many years and ended up going back to school and going to the University of Virginia for systems engineering. And part of that degree was at Darden. So I did a lot of business stuff with them and have started a PhD at UVA before we moved back here. And because I always wondered if I could teach, but I'm impressed because I know that the students these days are brilliant, and I'm not sure that I could handle that many people with that much knowledge asking questions in classes. So I don't know that I'm going to go that path necessarily, but I've been in this a long time. I'm class of 93 in my undergrad, right? So I've been doing this a while, and I still don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I know what I do today, but I know that I can pivot and do something else. And I feel like that is one of the great gifts of a technology or an engineering pathway is you really can pivot and you can sort of follow your heart, whichever direction you want.
Thank you so much. That's really great advice to help our kids not try to narrow themselves into one field and be open to still exploring a lot of things, no matter how far into your career you get. And finally, we'll hear from Tiffany.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the stories that the other women brought up really resonate with me. I was good at math and chemistry, and I knew I wanted to do something good, and I didn't really know what that was. I thought maybe something in like clean water or bringing food to people or something. And my dad had suggested chemical engineering to me. When I got to the chemical engineering school, I had no idea what a chemical engineer did. I heard that environmental engineering is really more civil, so I thought about switching. But in my mind, I was also thinking like, well, if I stay in chemical engineering, maybe I could go into med school instead. So I felt like it was a good background to be able to do a lot of different stuff. I also did a co-op, and my co-op was with ExxonMobil, which you wouldn't think is like for somebody who's like, I want to do something good and environmental would go to Exxon, but again, it was like a good experience. I knew it was really important to get work experience. And one of my roles as a co-op was to help reduce polluting gases and redirect them into usable products. So even though it might not seem very relevant, it really is. Like, you do kind of need to know how the world works. And I'm really grateful for that experience and thinking about like, how do we transition from what systems we have now to something that's more sustainable? And that's a pathway, is to clean up what we have right now. And then my first real job after graduation was in the environmental field, and I was designing equipment to reduce pollution from coal-fired power plants and natural gas plants. And so I was removing sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide from the flue gases. And you may not know, you may know, sulfur dioxide used to cause acid rain, and that's not even like something that we really talk about anymore. And that industry has kind of just saturated and is not really a huge job market anymore. So I guess we did kind of a good job there. And then I was really interested in climate change. So I worked on carbon capture plants, which is also what I had been studying in my chemical engineering degree as well. And it didn't really seem like that technology was moving very quickly. And so I just felt like part of the reason was because the policy wasn't there yet. So I decided to quit my job and go back to school for policy. But I have a lot of interests and I'm kind of scatterbrained. So I've done a lot of things. I did a lot of part-time jobs when I was in grad school that were, some of them were connected to environmental policy still. But I've also did a transportation policy project. I did a waste management project in China. I also did an internship on financial education policy in Texas and created a pilot program where I was helping kids save money in elementary school. I also help startups. There's a organization at UT called Austin Technology Incubator, so I worked for them. I also helped a clean tech nonprofit with some of their strategies and creating events that's called Clean Techs, which also still exists. So if you're interested, they have a lot of networking opportunities as well. If you do choose to go to UT, those are places that you could go to. So there, you could just explore so many things. And I think that when I first started in chemical engineering, I was afraid that I was going to get pigeonholed. But the truth is that, like, when you become an engineer or a scientist, you learn how to learn and you learn how to solve problems, and those things get carried throughout your career. So after grad school, I actually went back to the CO2, climate change, environmental technology business. And instead of being an engineer, I was actually doing business development. And so I was trying to make the business case for um, these environmental changes in the technology that we were working on. But in 2021, we had a huge winter storm, and I was out of power for a little bit. Luckily, not as bad as some others. I'm sure that you guys were all, you knew about it or went through it. It kind of just changed something in my mind, though, and I started to get really interested in solar and storage and residential systems and smaller systems. When you go into engineering, you tend to think like things that are bigger are going to be cheaper and it's better for society to build big, and smaller things are less efficient, but like there's resiliency that you build into it. So I quit my job again and then took a fellowship through the Department of Energy. And so it was kind of it was a little bit of a risk because I was changing careers into electricity policy. And I worked at the State Public Utility Commission on a new policy to allow people who had solar and storage or electric vehicles or smart thermostats to be able to contribute to the electricity system. So it's different from what I was doing in the past, where it's like cleaning up our old systems. And this one was building something totally new. And then I also, after the fellowship ended, I worked for a nonprofit and I was developing solar and storage systems for community centers that service low to moderate income communities around Texas. And I only worked there for a year, but I'm still helping them develop a solar and storage system at an affordable housing apartment complex in Arlington, which was my hometown. Um, so worked there for a little bit, and then now I'm doing back into energy policy and consulting. And somebody asked, why did I make that move? It wasn't necessarily a conscious decision to get into consulting, but it's just that, when I saw that, like, when working on small projects for communities, it's really gratifying because you get to see that change, but it can also feel kind of small versus on the policy level. The reason why they were developing that in the first place was because we had developed this policy at the state level. And so I wanted to get back into that. So yeah, so that's kind of been my career journey.
All right, thank you everybody. That's some really great advice. Next, I will ask our other facilitated question, which is tell us about your work in relation to today's topic. How do you approach energy and or environmental sustainability at your job? And if this is kind of a broad question, maybe you can come up with like a specific example of a project to tell us about. How about let's start with Rebecca this time.
Sorry, just to repeat, the question is how does energy sustainability play a role in our current jobs?
Like, how do you approach it in your specific field?
I see. Um, well, energy is baked into my current job, as a design and production engineer. Um, I have to take account of a lot of standards. So there's really large organizations like IEEE. I forgot the long name for it, but it's like the International Organization for Electrical Engineering. But basically, they set the standards on how resilient is a piece in a substation going to be? What tests do you need to undergo? How do you make sure that it meets like um, certain kVs or amperages, voltages and amperages for like certain applications? And you can go from like small electronics that you use your phone, radios, etc., to what I work on, which is high voltage substations. And how do we make sure that those are going to hold up over the next 50 years? How do we make sure that they're safe? And how do we make sure that they're outputting the amount of energy that they need to for a community? And in general, I would recommend y'all to look at those large organizations for whatever major field you want to go into. I know for mechanical engineering, there's American Society of Mechanical Engineers. For civil engineering, there's American Society for Civil Engineers. And generally, they have a lot of really good information on the different pathways you can take for those careers. And then I also wanted to include a little bit of a snippet from my last job in sustainability or manufacturing with sustainability in mind, which was when you think about producing a object, a product, a service, you want to think about how much carbon am I going to use up? How much water does this use if we're dyeing something? Is this dye going to like affect the water supply, and will that have an effect on the communities and how like plants drink up that water later on? uh so those were some factors that I needed to consider as I was designing a product for my last job. So it's kind of everywhere if you want it to be, and I would uh, highly recommend it, not just from a like good civil good perspective, but also from a uh, professional perspective, because generally managers, bosses, companies like that kind of thing.
Awesome, and thank you, Rebecca, for giving our students a resource to look into if they're interested. Next, let's hear from Kara.
Well, transportation engineers and transportation planners and people like this, policymakers, they're always trying to consider the benefits and costs of any decision, any investment, any policy that they may be pursuing. And so we are always quantifying the amount of congestion and emissions emissions depend on your energy sources. So like if you want to electrify the fleet, what that would mean for power plants, and what that would cost if you needed to increase power production as well as storage through battery, and how the emissions impacts, and not just the total tons of carbon dioxide or methane or particulate matter, but also the location, and then how that filters through to people's lungs or affects, meteorology around the world. So we monetize so that we can come up with benefit cost ratios associated with each decision. And crashes are a big cost, I have to say. They do eclipse the emissions cost, even though the cost of carbon is going up and up, because we are moving towards a lot of tipping points. And it's, so I think we're at $200 per ton equivalent right now. But if you fly, the amount of carbon that you give off at altitude is worth actually like $400 to $800 per ton, because the meteorological impacts and forcing of radiation that occur from the plane moving through that space high up. So it's a lot of science, but mostly on my end, we're just trying to quantify how much and how damaging is that, and what are the benefits of this decision versus the cost. So we try to be as wide open as we can be, wide-eyed, I guess I should say, wide-eyed, as we can be in quantifying all of the benefits and costs of any transportation investment or decision, whether it's, electrifying and giving credits, scrapping old vehicles that have high emissions, or building new lanes for roadways and expanding, transit, or something else. We're constantly calculating energy and emissions costs.
All right, thank you. That sounds like very interesting for anyone into statistics and data analytics. Much like me, I'm interested. Next, let's hear from Eliza.
So I'm glad that I followed you, Cara, because I don't have a lot that I've worked on in my career, but I can tell you the quantification, how important that is. I've done an insane number of cost benefit analysis, and I do not have that knowledge that I might need, because it's not that I've never worked in around construction or impacted anything. And we have two electric vehicles. Like we keep our house at a ridiculously hot temperature. Like we two engineers in the household, right? So we're always micro, but we don't know. I don't know if it's better to have the electric vehicles that I have or not, right? And so even as an engineer, and even as somebody who cares about it, understanding the real impact, like I didn't know, I had no idea that's what I mean. I figured on an airplane, it's probably bad on the emissions, but that communication is not as strong as it needs to be. The quantification, the explanation, the communication limits what can be done in this space, because as soon as the environment guys walk in, I promise you, on these large government projects, it's like, there they are saving the lizard, right? And it's not about saving the lizard, it's about saving the planet. And I can promise you, coming back to Texas after being gone for 30 years, it is different. I don't know what's going on with the sun here. I don't know why it's so hot, but there's stuff that's happening, and I don't feel like that's getting communicated well. And so anybody that wants to, it's at least as important to be able to communicate this to internally to your teams, externally to people just living here, as it is to actually do the work. So that's great. I'm glad. I find that absolutely fascinating, and I'm not surprised a bit that UT is involved in that. So.
All right, thank you. And last, we'll hear from Tiffany before moving on to our Q&A portion with Hannah.
Yeah, so I guess I just talked about my career, and there's like two parts I feel like to the energy transition and sustainability. One is that, we have our traditional systems, and our community, our culture, our society is built on those traditional systems of using oil and gas throughout our daily lives. So one part of it is to clean up and do the best that we can with those within those systems. And then the other part of my career has been like trying to build new systems and building new ways to do things, but it does kind of clash a lot of the time. Not necessarily because it doesn't make sense, or you can't make a case for it, but it's because like you have to be thinking creatively, differently, and people just are kind of sticky in the way that they think about things. So I like to look at the data and try to have a level head around what choices we should be making. And I also think that to just like a lot of times when, especially if you grew up thinking like I want to do something good, like we try to separate things into good things and bad things. But honestly, all of the decisions that we make as a society have consequences, and so you like others said, you have to go into it with kind of open eyes and to understand what those consequences are and to make those decisions deliberately. I also think that like if you don't in our systems, if you don't count it, it sometimes doesn't count. So especially like since I've been in the environmental space for so long, people didn't care about CO2 emissions for so long until they started now to be at least counted. And then people didn't put any value on it because we're looking at profits. And like we've slowly put a value on it. And those sort of things just slowly come up. And I think that if you are thinking about like making a transition into policy or something else, it is good to have that technical background to be able to explain like this is how the world works. And like it's great to be idealistic, but we also have to keep in mind that the way that we do things right now keep people safe because that's what people are used to. So we have to be cognizant of how we make those transitions.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. And now I'll pass things over to Hannah.
Okay, guys, so our participants have put a lot of questions in our Q&A. And so just to get things started, our first question is, how do you see your field evolving over the next decade? And for this one, let's start off with Rebecca.
Yeah, right now we see a lot of big trends, at least in my area of engineering manufacturing for electricity substations. Higher voltages, higher amperages, more power always. But also, there's been a lot of discussion in a lot of the conferences I've been to of digitizing different ways to help maintain power lines. There's been some talks about drones, using drones to observe power lines at a distance, having sensors embedded into power lines to see if there's an interruption in services. So that's kind of where I see things, but I know I also have a very narrow scope. So I also want to acknowledge that. And I hope our other attendees have a lot more perspective than me.
I appreciate that honest answer. Thank you, Rebecca. How about you, Elisa? How do you see the field evolving over the next decade?
So, Rebecca, it's funny that you said that that's narrow because I was thinking that's not narrow at all. One of the things I love about what she said is all these different things are going to be deployed in different ways. And what I do is actually, I'm an algorithm person, right? So I develop algorithms, mostly machine learning type algorithms. And for me, from what I've learned and what I think of in this space is about machine learning, right? So the more things that you have data coming in from, the more that you can learn to balance the supply and demand to make it the best distribution of the lowest cost or the highest return. And I think that's where that's going to be. I think machine learning is going to continue to improve that, but it also, you need more things collecting data, which is what Rebecca's talking about, which is exciting. That's just sort of an exponential explosion of the things that can really improve the environment. And I know that I know people smarter than me are working in that space to do exactly that type of algorithm development.
Yes, the world of AI, like it's truly changing so many fields. So I think, seeing how that is affecting STEM as well is very interesting. So moving on to our next question. This one I'm going to direct to Tiffany. How has working in different countries affected your point of view of energy and how can it be used?
Yeah, so when I was working on the carbon capture and SO2 work, I was actually working for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. So that's a Japanese company. I've gone and done a project in China with Mitsubishi. A lot of these systems are very international in nature. Even like if you think about climate change and CO2, that's a global issue, pollution issue versus like particulate matter or SO2 is very localized. Um, and then you start to like think about geography too and where people are and what their society looks like. So for example, in Japan, they're an island. They were using a lot of nuclear for a long time, but then they had the earthquakes, which caused a lot of devastation. So they were shifting away from nuclear into coal and natural gas. But they're since they're an island, they don't really have those resources. And then they have to start shipping natural gas from, say, like the US. And then the US is now shipping natural gas to all these countries. But for a while, Europe was like, we're not going to buy natural gas from the US anymore because you are going against our sustainability requirements. And then so that also affects the US. And there's also like nowhere to inject CO2 in Japan. So then they're thinking about like, do we ship things from the ship natural gas to Japan and then ship CO2 back to the US? Or do we do something else? And so now they're looking at ammonia as as a fuel source instead. And so then when that burns, it's nitrogen and water or whatever. So that it's just everybody has their own issues. And when I was working in waste management in China, it's also interesting to think about like in China, most of the waste there, they have a very high wet organic waste because I guess they eat a lot of food. And there's like a culture of like preparing too much food and an abundance. And so they have very high methane in their landfills, which they could use for electricity, or they can burn their heavy organic waste to make energy in incinerators. But we don't necessarily do that in the US because of different rules or regulations. Um, so yeah, I mean, I just think it's really interesting to be able to go and look at things. I think I really like working in the electricity sector now because it is very localized, and I got kind of tired of traveling a lot or having to work across time zones. But everybody is kind of going through similar things right now, but at different paces. Some countries are developing, so their electricity use is getting higher. Other countries are more interested in renewable energy than the US has, so we can learn from them. Even within the US, we have so many different electricity policies within states or regions, so we can learn from each other. But geography really matters, and I think that that's one thing that came out of working in so many different places.
Yes, I really like the perspective that you gave on that because climate change and everything happening in sustainability affects certain areas differently. And so I think it's important to like bring that nuance into these sorts of conversations. And so for our last question for this webinar, I'm going to ask to Kara because of course you are our UT faculty and our students want to know how could a high schooler or undergrad student participate in sustainability efforts?
Yeah, so I typed as fast as I could in there. So I've been in one of these sessions before where all these questions came in that did not get answered in the lifetime. So Tiffany, Lisa, you guys, let's see, Rebecca, I'm having to move my comment box around. Please feel free to start answering some of those questions while I talk. But what I suggested there is what I see as the biggest emissions issues that high schoolers have some control over is their destinations for family trips, family vacations, which, if you can stay in the on this continent, so maybe Canada or Mexico, you can reduce that distance. You might be able to drive like Yellowstone, even the Ozarks. So keep your travel distances as a family short. Don't say, I want to see China. So my son keeps saying, I want to see China. I'm like, I can tell you about China. So I think, you really want to be very careful when you make those flights. So if you can help your families be really careful about flight and advertise that across the high school community, because you kids have so much of an impact on what your families do. And so destination choice for vacations, also buying your parents who are taking business trips, these carbon credits. I gave you a link in there so that they're seeing like, my kid doesn't want to buy me a gift because I don't need anything, but he's trying to buy out of this carbon emissions that I'm doing when I do my business trips. And so it makes the parents start thinking about, well, maybe I should really not go to Europe every year for this conference. Maybe I should start trying to do online participation more. I actually started 7 years ago an online conference. And so just trying to reduce that long distance travel. Same thing for tournaments. Like it's dangerous and it's a lot of emissions. It's tiring to make your parents drive you to tournaments all over the state. And so being as efficient as you can be, which vehicle are you guys going to take? Can you take a Prius? Can you take an all electric vehicle? Can you just stay local and play your darn soccer and basketball games here? These kinds of things are really important, but you're flying so far. It's like driving a Prius by yourself to China. It's really, it's actually worse than that because of the at elevation. So another thing I'm really surprised high schools aren't doing is getting parents to have their kids carpool, younger kids to and from school so that the parents aren't having to chauffeur their kids to and from that school. That's not as much of an emissions impact, but there's a congestion impact, there's a time savings benefit. So those are cool things that you could probably program that could be adopted at other high schools. So trying to get that going. Those will be a lot more effective, I think, than a recycling campaign, but go ahead and do the recycling campaigns too, keep reminding people what can be recycled and reusing, learning how to sew. All these things I think would be really helpful.
Yes, thank you so much. All of those are very good, not even only for high school students, for everyone to start implementing into their daily routines. And so that ends our Q&A portion, and I'm going to turn things back over to Victoria.
All right. Yes. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. And thank you to our fabulous panelists for volunteering their time and helping give some advice and some insight for everybody. Hannah has just added into the chat some links to join us again in future Zooms. And as well, if we weren't able to get into your questions, please add them to our Summer 25 Padlet online, and we'll be answering those questions online all summer long. So we look forward to seeing everyone at our future Role Model Monday webinars. Our next one will be on STEM and entrepreneurship. So please check your email and social media for links and details about all of that. And with that, we are going to wrap up. Thank you again to our panelists for joining us today and also all our attendees. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.
Feel
Bye.
free to email me, guys. You can look up our emails online. Mine's super easy to find, or you can even just call me here at the office. I'll talk to you soon.